the strongest Shikigami in history, and the crown jewel of the Zenin clan. A Shikigami with some of the greatest narrative portrayal until Sukuna, the only Shikigami to not be tamed by a 10 Shadows user. But what if we unleash this monster in the Culling games? How would it fare? Well, in this video we will find that answer out. Tokyo 1 Colony. Amai is pretty much featless, so we'll move him out of the equation. And Jetpack Girl and Harbor are pretty trash. The Jetpack Girl sneak attack did minimal damage to Yuji, and she got taken out by curse energy debris flung by Yuji. Not to mention Harbor received 2 attacks before being knocked out by Yuji, and Mahoraga having extraordinarily higher physicals than Yuji, we can swiftly move on to his next fight in this colony, being against Higuruma. Now I'm going to use the strongest versions of each character because it's a lot more interesting. So this Higuruma will have reverse curse technique, domain amplification, and I'll use his entire feats that he demonstrated across the arc. But even with these feats and fights that he has done, fighting against a stronger Sukuna, he pales in comparison to the physicals Mahoraga demonstrated not only in Shibuya but in the Gojo vs Sukuna fights. Higuruma's durability isn't anything special, and aside from taking punches from a holding back Sukuna, it doesn't really amount to anything, especially as Yuji's one major punch in the clash sent him flying. You could argue his mentality was wavering, but it's not really a good look for him overall. His speed isn't anything notable, and if Yuji without curse energy could keep up with him, it showcases his physicals are not his strong point, even if Yuji is a freak of nature. However, his domain expansion is the only chance of a slight victory, and that's dependent on how it interacts with the Shikigami. With how low a percentage it is to get the death penalty, the likelihood is pretty much non-existent unless he can be trialed as an accomplice to Sukuna's crimes. The reason I say this is he could be forced to bear the punishment as an accomplice to the death of Gojo or to the Shibuya incident that led to the massacre. But with Mahoraga technically not being in control, with Megami or Sukuna being the controllers, it would most likely take the brunt of the trial, and with how trash Judgment is, I highly doubt it would trial Mahoraga. Who knew I'd be doing crime and punishment with a Shikigami? So let's give Higuruma a bone and say he manages to use confiscation. This would grant him the gavel, which can be extended and will grant him some utility. But what would be taken in this scenario? The curse energy from Mahoraga? The ability to adapt? There's way too many variables that I can't give you an honest answer, as the ability to adapt is a phenomenon, not a curse technique. So even if I try to give Higuruma a bone, he's still cooked by all regards. But let's entertain that the ability to adapt is taken away. Mahoraga from curse energy alone is significantly stronger, as shown before, and if one hit by the gavel don't put down the curse energy-less Yuji, there's no way Mahoraga would be under any threat, which would boil down to a loss of Higuruma. Now our main character Yuji Itadori will test the Mahoraga challenge, and at this current time of chapter 254, he has gotten far stronger with still more showcases to come from his bag. He has reverse curse technique, blood manipulation, and his overall physical stats have honestly been significantly boosted, especially from his first clash in the Culling game. From speed, he was able to keep up with Maki when she asked if he can speed up. He also had his solo clash against Sukuna, and granted Sukuna wasn't going all out, plus the nerfs from Megami. In both occasions, he was able to leave his respective mark in the clash and not be overwhelmed by a superior opponent. His curse energy reserves have seemed to have a significant increase, as he's used reverse curse technique on a multitude of occasions during his fight with Yuta, meaning his endurance is something not to be questioned about. We're already aware of Yuji's freakish durability, and tanking punches from Sukuna pretty much getting right back up, and was able to hit Sukuna with multiple soul punches and be very competitive in the Yuta-Yuji team-up, which is a testament to his increase in strength. It hasn't been directly stated, but with Heian Sukuna's portrayal to be a lot faster than his Mega Kuna form, him being dusted in the foot race isn't enough against Yuji. However, one thing Mahoraga does have going for him is keeping up with the fastest sorcerer Gojo. To be fair though, it was in a 2v1, sometimes 3v1 setting, which did allow both Mahoraga and Agito to be competitive. One thing that ain't taken into account enough is the fact that Sukuna is in control and can maneuver the Shikigami to prevent it from harm's way. However, from physicals, this is probably the closest we'll get in comparison to speed, but I'll still suggest Mahoraga is ahead depending on your interpretation. AP is very hard to compare as we have no real scale for the soul punches, and even if it was to get a black flash, the fact that Mahoraga ate black flashes from a blue enhanced Gojo, it doesn't bode well for Yuji. Moreover, with him showing piercing blood and supernova, I don't believe these are enough to put down the Shikigami, which unfortunately leads to the ending result of Yuji losing, still pretty comfortably, with this not being an overall difficult fight for Mahoraga. But Yuji's durability is insane, with Mahoraga not having a world cutting slash as he hasn't adapted to Infinity. It mostly rely on his physical attacks that are still pretty strong with their own realm, being able to send the 15-finger Sukuna fly. Granted, not much damage was done to Sukuna, but that is also Sukuna. And we also have Mahoraga able to one-tap Yuzu with the sword, but you can also say that Sukuna Curse Energy boost does make it a lot more stronger. However, I did want to highlight that the physicals are a lot more closer in this respect, and it showcased Yuji is scarily climbing up the ranks even if he hasn't reached the pinnacle of the verse. Now Mahoraga has cleared Yuji's section. How would he fare against Reggie's group? The first person we'll have the pleasure of fighting is Culling, and I do not care to check his name because Megumi completely destroyed him and was able to stop him from jumping him. What do you think Mahoraga will do to him? We then have Hazanoki, and he has at least 2 showcases that we can pull from, even if it's a minimum. He has reverse curse technique, and his technique allows him to blow up body parts. But with Megumi taking one of them and leaving with somewhat minimum damage, even if he blew up his entire body, Mahoraga probably just laughs it off. Not to mention he got overwhelmed by some of Kenjaku's weaker curses, not an anti-feat. It doesn't bode too well for him, and he was in a perpetual stalemate with our resident Joker Tagaba. Then we have Remy. This might be my bottom 1 character and way too annoying, and she got captured by the military, so I don't need to say too much. We then have the GOAT Takaba, and this is where it honestly gets very interesting. We know 1, it's in character for Takaba to not want to kill, and we also know from how his showcases he was able to threaten Kenjaku to a point where he potentially anticipated losing. However, how would that translate to Mahoraga? From an offensive standpoint, his early attacks pretty much don't affect Takaba due to the nature of his curse technique. This pretty much gives Takaba the ultimate defense of being seen against Hazanoki and before Kenjaku started to break his spirit. Now I've personally never seen Mahoraga ever speak, so I doubt he has the capability to do what Kenjaku does, which now boils down to who is going to win. When Takaba starts doing his comedy sketches, there's a good chance Mahoraga that will eventually adapt to the concept of comedian. In a similar manner that after numerous attacks, Mahoraga developed the ability to cut through Infinity, and I believe the same concept would apply here to Mahoraga. Regardless of how complex comedian is, which will eventually break through the reality warping ability, now if Takaba was in a more of the mindset to kill people, there could be an argument that he could win. The issue is, would the different comedy skits lead to different levels of adaptation, or would it work like Yuzu's construction where it would adapt to all things made out of liquid metal, in the case all reality warping abilities? I'm inclined to go with the second, but it's really up to your own interpretation. But with the fact Mahoraga adapts then regenerates instantly, it doesn't bode well for Takaba, but will definitely be a very tricky matchup just due to the nature of his curse technique. Up next is my boy Megumi. Now he has his incomplete domain, 10 shadows, but he does not have any physicals near to really fight against Mahoraga. Not to mention he was unable to tame him from all our understanding, which just doesn't bode well for him. However, this isn't the first time he's fought someone way out of his tax bracket like Toji and Sukuna. Granted, these weren't the best showcases for him, but it could show even when he's outmatched he can maneuver with his high IQ. We saw with Toji he was able to make a shadow in time to nearly stab Toji, but he had no idea his dad was Barry Allen. With Sukuna he attempted to corner him to make Yuji heal and failed miserably, but he's never been one not to attempt the impossible. But the reason I'm prolonging this argument is he has his own trump card, Mahoraga. So low-key, Megumi has a perfect chance to stalemate with the Mahoraga versus Mahoraga crime that could occur. Now I can't tell you who would win. Would they adapt to his ability to adapt? Like what does that even mean? My interpretation is that Shikigami will be made by the user's curse energy, meaning the sword of extermination won't be useful in this case. The simple win con that Mahoraga, not Megumi's version, has is that it should be stronger due to being influenced by Sukuna's curse energy, so eventually it could overpower it. But that's really and truly the only one win con because I have no idea how one can adapt to something that also adapts, and it's too much of a brain bust. I can't give you an answer. So I'm going to leave that open to your interpretation and leave this with either Mahoraga wins or they stalemate, but I'm going to incline to Mahoraga wins just by Sukuna curse energy tax. And then the final opponent in the Tokyo 1 colony is Reggie, and he's the closest from an ability perspective that would be able to fulfill the requirements to defeat Mahoraga due to his receipt summoning a multitude of abilities. However, Reggie just isn't strong enough, nor has the variety that we have seen to be able to really affect Mahoraga. His best trump card was a house. And bro, I'll be so real, a house is not putting down Mahoraga or all those kitchen knives as well. Not only to mention his physicals are nothing out of this world, as a 120% Megami was far superior in the physical aspect, and it leads to Reggie leaving his final words to Mahoraga. Mahoraga now takes his next journey to the Sendai colony, where his first clash will be against Druv. Now Druv was off screen and the only thing we know is how his curse technique works, with his Shikigami working like a domain, but he severely lacks the AP needed to put down Mahoraga, so we can move on nicely to the next matchup, which is Mahoraga and Kururushi. Now Kururushi is actually mad underrated, and he's actually had a very good showcase against a holding back based Yuta. His cockroaches in the swarm were stated to be a problem from even Yuta, and he also had the earthen insect trance where on impact it will blind the user, which could be very useful. He has the ability to fly with the swarm and is a very underrated curse overall, and not to mention the festering life blade, which on impact attaches bugs which can grow on the user and was shown to rip off Yuta's arm. However, this is all for nothing, as Mahoraga has a one-shot sword to curses with the Sword of Extermination, so even with the great utility, Kuro has no chance. We then get to our next user, which is Uro. To me, Uro is very underrated, which is so tragic, while her ability of sky manipulation is one of the most broken abilities in the verse. She also has Thin Ice Missile, which breaks guard, and her durability seems to be pretty good, being able to take a gauntlet of attacks from Yuta and Rika. Now in a similar manner with Gojo's ability, I have no idea to quantify how quick it would take to adapt, because sky manipulation is a technique that could count as complex, but I don't believe it works in the same realm as Gojo's. Not to mention she can fly, she has good maneuverability. I'm not one to use the anime that much, but one thing that was shown is that I believe can apply to Mahoraga, is that he can probably adapt to be able to bypass sky manipulation, so whether that is flying or just bypassing the ability to warp the sky. And we've also seen a stronger character in Yuta use Thin Ice Missile on Ryu, which was not enough to put him down. With also not seeing Uro's domain, I would headcanon is very similar to her technique, which also doesn't bode well to her putting down Mahoraga. Not to mention, at the bare minimum, we can use Ryu's durability as a placeholder for Mahoraga, as they both ate a dismantle used by Sukuna, which were not enough to put them down respectively. Overall, this leads to Mahoraga cleaning house and moving to his second last fighter, Ryu Ishiguro. However, I do believe Uro is quite underrated, just does not have the capabilities to put down this Shikigami. Ryu, with confirmation durability higher than both Yuta and Yuji, had the best showcase in terms of opposition in the Sendai colony. His main arsenal of the cursed energy beams and his signature move Granate Blast are very powerful, but not enough to take down Mahoraga, which honestly means he's cooked. His bag is very one-dimensional, and his curse technique making his output the same regardless of whether he uses a curse technique or not, means his ultimate reliance is down to his curse energy beams, which should be a phenomenon Mahoraga can adapt to pretty quickly. The only chance of victory is if he used a max output curse energy beam from the jump, and with a large range that it one-shot to Mahoraga. But we also know that's not very in character, with the base of him also looking for dessert and kind of taking an interest to the person that he's fighting, so I doubt he would start off with his most devastating attack from the jump. However, based on what was shown in Sendai, there isn't much evidence to support that. A half-dead Uro only got knocked out by the beam, Ryu ate his own beam, granted it's his own curse energy, so it wasn't as effective. Yuta used RCT to heal and also palmed away one of the beams. That nothing suggests that Mahoraga will get one shot even if Ryu is very strong. His physicals are top tier as well, but he unfortunately lacks the required bag to put down the Shikigami. His endurance and durability are crazy, that he could last a decent amount of time in the clash, but it will eventually lead to a loss to Mahoraga. Now the very key matchup, the one where it gets very interesting, that's Yuta versus Mahoraga. Now we already had a mini setup for this clash, where Yuta declared he'd jump into the Gojo vs Sukuna clash, but does Yuta have the capabilities to take down Mahoraga? Pre his domain expansion, I would have said no. But now we know with his domain works, I think he's one of the very few sorcerers who can actually put down Mahoraga due to his utility. Unlike Ryu, whose entire motif was dessert, Yuta is a person who takes no pleasure in fights, so he'd mostly get straight down to business. He also has the pleasure of knowing Mahoraga due to Megami and the students watching the Gojo vs Sukuna clash, which boils down to why I think he can win. His physicals are most definitely weaker than the Shikigami, but the simple fact is a 2v1, and my understanding the Sword of Extermination won't take Rika away as it's built with the user's curse energy. His domain expansion is the ultimate Mahoraga counter. Combined attacks of Jacob's Ladder, Cleave and Dismantle, Curse Speech, Curse Energy Beams if he's full manifestation, Ju Shikigami and more, is too much of an arsenal for Mahoraga to survive, And not to mention the Shikigami has no simple domain, and even if he has better physicals, Yuta is an endurance monster with his huge curse energy supply, which leads to our first combatant to beat Mahoraga. I believe it's just overall arsenal and everything that he has in combination will just give him the best opportunity to beat the Shikigami, and he fits the criteria of having multiple strong attacks to be able to overpower him. With the Sendai colony being wrapped up, we move on to Tokyo number 2. Now with Charles having future sight, the only future he's seeing is his ass getting beat, and if a base Hikari could blitz his precog, there's no chance he's doing anything of significance to Mahoraga. Shinji Hikari, the man with incredible luck. But today will be when his luck runs out due to his lack of versatile bag against Mahoraga. His physicals are insane, and with unlimited curse energy and the best healing in the verse, it will be one of the hardest fights for Mahoraga to put him down due to his regeneration being insane. However, the moment he's not in jackpot, it would be very difficult for him to be effective against Mahoraga, that regardless of his great speed, reaction feats, and regen, he currently lacks anything but punch it and kick it, from what we've seen, to put down Mahoraga, which would lead to his unfortunate demise. This hurts me to say, but Gege, give me something else and then we can run back this matchup. Now we go to his opponent, which is the Lightning God Kashimo. I'll be using the strongest version, which is the Curse Technique Kashimo. Now this version speed-wise should be faster than Mahoraga. I'd be personally confused when people just ignore the statements attached to the Curse Technique, because the second fastest sorcerer in the series managed to blitz him like that isn't happening to anybody else in a 1v1. If you're not Gojo and Sukuna, and the only other argument I can hear is Maki, you're not faster than Kashimo. His AP is ridiculous with the lightning discharge, which would be durability negation since it's lightning and his version of a sure hit. Not to mention the EM waves and the sound waves, which based on the description was said to destroy anything, and whatever this panel says here, which I can't say, I'll be so real. So I did a little research, and this is supposed to destroy anything exposed to radiation. And if I understood it correctly, it basically should be a one shot, but Sukuna dodged all of them, so we'll never know. But with these attacks in combination and with how fast he's going, I truly think he's the second person to defeat Mahoraga. Community have done this thing where they believe Kashimo was weak, where his circumstances in his fights were completely different. Not to mention with lightning being a complex substance, I believe it will take more than 1 to 2 attacks for Mahoraga to adapt, especially as the slashing attacks at least took 1 to 2, and that is a more simpler technique, which would give Kashimo enough time to put him down. Not to mention he can manifest any phenomenal electricity.
Subject. That later.
Yeah, I can't lie, I don't care to research that, but with his current capabilities, I think he has enough to put him down. And not to mention with the speed in a 1v1 setting, because I know someone would bring up him keeping up with Gojo. But as I previously explained, that being in a 2 or sometimes 3v1 setting isn't as impressive as a 1v1 where we saw Kashimo blitz and weaken Sukuna. Now yes, that Sukuna is weakened and is very hard to compare to other people, but high-end Kuna being overwhelmingly faster is not the knock people think it is. You could mention that their speed would be somewhat relative, with the first punch that Mahoraga sends Sukuna flying, he was able to catch him off guard. However, I don't really think that is consistent, because as the fight goes, we see how confident and easy in control Sukuna is, and I'm also not using the anime in case people are trying to make that assumption. However, if you don't think Kashimo can put him down quickly, then Kashimo will eventually lose for his one curse technique breaking down his body, and Mahoraga will adapt to his attacks and then will steamroll him. But this one will probably gather a lot more mixed opinions, so let me know your thoughts down below. Before I move on to sakurjuma colony, I'm just going to say Gojo and Sukuna cook Mahoraga, and this shouldn't be something I need to explain, and I'd rather clear that up now before I get to the latter stages of the matchups. The first person in the sakurjuma colony to face Mahoraga will be our resident bloodbender Kamo. Now Kamo is a bootleg Choso, and unfortunately him being able to react to Naya is a great reaction feat for him. He also managed to bypass his huge weakness of blood manipulation by circulating the blood into his packets, which is very intelligent. However, he does not have the AP nor versatility to put down Mahoraga from what we've seen, and he's unfortunately a victim. Next to run the gauntlet is our resident tag team duo, Miyu and Daido. To make it more interesting, I'll make it a 2v1 matchup, but Miyu is pretty much useless in this equation, as he'll need Mahoraga to consent to sumo with him in the simple domain. Shout out my consent king. Consent is very important, or you'll end up like Diddy. Daido with the soul split katana doesn't get the requirements to use the no durability. Now even with his Getsuka Tensho slash, I don't see any way he can beat the Shikigami, and they'll both eventually be put down. Now to curse Naya. This is kinda hard because the Naya that did the best is the one before his domain expansion. With projection sorcery, he was able to deal significant damage to Maki when he reached Mark 3. This attack needs to be built up, and I'm unsure how I'd work with his new form, as the aerodynamics of the previous one allows him to get even faster. However, I'd assume his hybrid curse form should be able to reach the same speeds, plus the rules of projection sorcery stopping you from moving. Now, will this attack be enough to beat Mahoraga? 1. If Mahoraga moves, he'll be frozen in place, which means he technically would have been attacked by the technique. Not to mention the first touch of projection sorcery activates the technique, which means he could have been attacked twice. In terms of complexity, you have to follow the 24th frames rule. I'm not sure how to quantify that, but I assume picture resolution isn't something overly complex, however that's dependent on your interpretation. There's a very good argument that before Naya can attack that the rules of projection sorcery won't affect Mahoraga, and he would have adapted pretty nicely to the attack. One thing to mention is when he adapts to certain attacks, some of them become more limiting in factors before he eventually can bypass them and it doesn't become as effective. It doesn't stop him from taking damage, meaning if you do have like separate attacks like a Sukuna and other factors, it'll be able to be very useful. But let's say he didn't adapt by then. Would that Mark 3 attack be enough to put Mahoraga down? It's hard to say, as a not fully realized Maki did not die from the attack and came back in about 3 minutes after. We also know that only other attack that has put a heavily restriction user down is a purple. Not to mention Naoya's attack did more damage than Sukuna's Black Flash. Granted, Maki blocked with both hands, but Mahoraga is also taking what I'd imagine the strongest Black Flash with relative to no damage. The only statement that could lower his stocks is a red from Gojo could one-shot him. But going all out Gojo red to me is a stronger attack than Mark 3, so it just depends on your interpretation in my honest opinion. However, his domain expansion could be very useful. However, he would have to be used instantly, which isn't very in character, which would lead to his demise beforehand. Not to mention with him being a vengeful curse spirit, he should be a victim to the Sword of Extermination, but you could argue that vengeful spirits are exceptions. This matchup at face value is a little trickier due to his abilities, but I'll say Mahoraga wins regardless of the factors brought up, especially as Naya's IQ is bottom 1. Next is Maki, and this is a perfect example of an unstoppable force versus unmovable object. The Soul Split Katana with bypassing durability could be very useful here, and if Maki gets a significant attack, it could one-shot Mahoraga. However, Mahoraga physicals are good enough that I don't see him getting blitzed, and with it adapting to all 4 nominal, I suggest it'll get to a point where it could sense Maki, but that's on my own headcanon, I can't really prove that. Not to mention, would it not adapt to the blade if it wasn't a one-shot kill, which would put Maki in some serious trouble. In terms of the attacks like Ryu and Yuji, her durability is greater than both of them, that she should endure the longest we've seen, which gives her ample opportunity to put down Mahoraga with a clean strike. But I'd venture that Mahoraga would adapt in time to be able to put down Maki. There's one wildcard, which is could Maki cut down the wheel in terms of preventing Mahoraga from adapting? I'd say no, as we've seen Mahoraga fall from even crazier scenarios, and even when Sukuna destroyed Mahoraga the first time, the wheel was still there. Granted, this could be because it was a fake ritual, so it just dissolved back into the shadows, but there's too many questionable variables for me to give a 100% answer. My honest answer, even with Maki's precog, crazy durability, speed and hacks, sword, I do believe Mahoraga adaptation is far bigger hacks that should eventually lose. However, you're free to give your interpretation because there's many factors in place. The best big brother takes the mantle to fight Mahoraga, and even though he's a nice guy, he does not have the capabilities to defeat the Shikigami. He's shown his ability to adapt faster fighters with using Red Stack to perceive Naoya. Even though he was getting washed, he did succeed in his objective in bringing out Kenjaku's curse technique, and he has a wide variety of movesets related to blood manipulation. However, I just don't see any of these attacks being enough to put down the Shikigami, and we saw Yuji, granted he's a freak, who has even with pain will power through, get hit by Convergence and still continue to fight. Piercing Bod now can be dodged by Kenjaku, who should be slower than Mahoraga. He isn't a curse as Choso's poison, so it won't affect the Shikigami, and he unfortunately does not have the capabilities, which would lead to a pretty easy victory for the Shikigami. Now it starts to get more interesting, and we have Yuki next to test the Mahoraga. Honestly, I'm not going to waste time on scaling her, because this is a legit one punch or she's cooked. Now Star Rage is a technique that ignored concept, and also she adds a ton of mass. Now if you think that one big punch can defeat Mahoraga, then that's valid. Her technique is so hard to compare to others, as aside from her first punch that went Kenjaku through the barrier, her output was low throughout the entire clash. Not to mention Mars could be detailed as a complex technique, but a combined attack with Garuda could actually get the job done. Not to mention she has a domain, but since we've never seen it, I can't use this as a factor. I'm not including the black hole because destroying the world isn't a victory. If I'm honest, I'm stumped and I can't give you an answer, so I'm going to leave this to open interpretation to you, the audience, and let me know whether you agree Yuki can defeat Mahoraga or not. There's a lot of good factors in her favour, with the fact that her technique is very damaging and has the capabilities to one-shot people. However, if you don't scale that initial punch to be very high, and if you don't believe a combination of attacks can put down Mahoraga, I completely understand why you think she doesn't win. Next is Kenjaku, and with his elite IQ and knowledge on Mahoraga, I believe he has the capabilities to put down the Shikigami. While we know his contact with the higher ups, so he should already have a good enough idea on how the Shikigami works. He's also one not to delay the fights, unless he's trolling, so he'd most likely use his domain expansion instantly or set up an attack with curse spirit manipulation, maybe Uzumaki, to then relay straight into a domain. With those conditions, eventually he could win the clash due to his IQ and willingness to not play with his food. Now his physicals aren't going to be on par with Mahoraga, however his intelligence is enough to make the difference, and I've always been on the opinion, if you're not Gojo or Sukuna, physicals are slightly overrated, as we've seen weaker characters able to react against far quicker fighters. In my personal opinion, Kenjaku will win due to his nature plus combined attacks, and I know Yuki's durability doesn't scale to anyone else, but a mini Uzumaki leaving her with a donut plus a combination of multiple domain attacks would be enough to put him down before he could attack. However, if you disagree, he lacks the firepower due to Mahoraga's quick regeneration and ability to adapt fairly quickly. I also think that's a fair aspect. I just believe that Kenjaku having prerequisite knowledge will most definitely lead him to victory. And I also think there's a fact that people might bring up, the fact that Yuki got straight up after the short hits. Not to mention that she was bleeding straight after, it was only one attack. I do think a combination before Mahoraga adapts could do the job. However, you're free to disagree, which leaves it to open interpretation. However, I will go with the opinion that he wins. Now to the final three combatants. I'm not including the military because while they fought, Helicopter Man was strong. So imagine them meeting Godzilla. Now I'll start off with Angel, as this is one where I'm going to say I have no idea. How does Jacob's ladder work with the Shikigami? Mahoraga isn't evil per se, so the whole effect from Angel shouldn't apply. Mahoraga also isn't a vessel, so there won't be a separation, and the Shikigami also doesn't have a curse technique to separate. I venture the Shikigami wins, but with my lack of information how Jacob's ladder interacts, I'll move on to Yuzu versus Mahoraga. Now if Yuzu isn't on her crazy timing, and she whips out her domain from the jump, the True Spear meets all the capabilities to one-shot the Shikigami. But from what we've seen, it's also not very in character, which means she'd probably back out her liquid metal, which would be the downfall of her in this situation. With the liquid metal not being overly strong in terms of one-shot capabilities, the Shikigami wouldn't have too difficult time to adapt to the concept as shown in the Sukuna Yuzu fight. Regardless of if she creates the perfect spear, Mahoraga would have adapted to the entire premise of liquid metal, which would cause her to lose. For the most part, domains are seen as the trump card, and only very few sorcerers use them instantly, so I suggest Yuzu wins, however with an asterisk, because if she uses her domain straight away, the True Spear meets the requirements to one-shot the Shikigami. However, based on her character and how she is, I doubt she would do so, which goes to my likely answer that she would lose. Our final fighter is Urame, and honestly I haven't seen enough of Urame to suggest what the outcome would be. The ice attacks used took multiple limbs from Hikari, showing deadly AP. And in Shibuya, from a casual attack, managed to freeze multiple grade 1s. Not to mention, Urame was told not to kill anybody, which means we didn't get to see the full capabilities. Not to mention the full maximum output for Maki and Yuji, that there's an argument Mahoraga could be cooked instantly. But this is a conversation I'd like to go back to later, as I'm not 100% confident on my answer, so I'll also leave this to open interpretation. Now after clearing the Culling game gauntlet, how many fighters have successfully defeated the Shikigami? The names I'm most confident are Gojo, Sukuna, Yuta, Kashimo and Kenjaku, meaning 5 fighters I can say confidently will beat the Shikigami. There are also some outliers such as Yuki, Yurizo, Urame, who could have the capability. However, I'll leave that to you, to the audience, to whether you think they can pass the Mahoraga test. I also want to reiterate, I'm not using the anime as a staple for this video, as Sukuna's playful nature in fights isn't reflective of their ability. Mahoraga's narrative portrayal is insane, and as a standalone character has all the makings of a top 5 character. But I also want people to take into account Sukuna playing with his food is consistent with every fight he's practically been in. However, this isn't a knock against Mahoraga, but it doesn't mean every character will act in that exact same manner. Overall, thank you for watching, let me know your opinion down below, and have a good one.